And really our goal is to bring you engaging and inspiring science stories about science to better understand the physical, the natural world, but also to highlight the incredible ways that science can play a role in improving society. And so beyond the broadcast series, we do so much more. So if this is your first time on a NOVA page, we encourage you to look around, check out our collection of digital videos, science news articles, science games on our NOVA Labs platform, our Antarctic Extremes YouTube series, and so much more. So please do look around, and thank you for being here.
So we're really honored to be talking with our guest today, Christian Cooper. Chris is an avid birder and a board member of the New York City Audubon, and a former editor and writer for Marvel Comics. He's currently a biomedical editor with Health Science Communications. So throughout our bit of time together this afternoon, if you have any questions for Chris, please feel free to leave them in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during our time together. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to chat with us.
My pleasure, Gina. Happy to be here.
Great. So we just wanted to, start from the beginning. What was your first experience with birding, and what attracted you to the hobby? What is it about birds that really captivates you?
Well, I'll start with the general. Well, I'll start with the specific first. I was a young kid, and my parents decided that for some reason that I needed to take a summer woodworking class. And I was like, oh, great. So they had me either make a footstool or a bird feeder. And I was like, bird feeder. So I built a bird feeder and put it in the backyard. And then all these crows with red patches at the shoulder of the wing kept coming to the bird feeder. And I'm like, oh my God, I've discovered a new species of crow. This is so exciting. And then eventually I found out they were red-winged blackbirds. Still a great bird. To this day, my sign of spring is when the red-winged blackbirds come back. That was sort of part of it. And then the other half of it was, since both my parents were teachers, and my dad was a biology teacher, so nature was always big in our household. So I think that laid a foundation. And then one summer, not long after that, we took, since they were both teachers, they both had the summer off, and they bundled me and my sister and the family dog into a Volkswagen Westphalia camper, that little van size thing.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we were all crammed in that for 3 months going cross country. Not a lot of room for a lot of stuff. And one of the few things we had was a field guide to the birds. Because my dad being a biology teacher, he decided to bring that. And so a lot of time driving on the road, I was flipping through that. At the time, I had a good memory. And by the time we hit the West Coast, something goes flying by and I go, oh, look, Mom and Dad, there goes a magpie. And they're like, how the hell does he know that? And it's because I remembered it from the book. So, and the two things in combination just kind of started it. So that's the specific. But I think the general thing about birds, why they're so appealing, is because they communicate with the same senses that we do. We have a really strong relationship with dogs, human beings, but we don't communicate with the same senses. We have the same emotional palate as dogs, but their main sense is their nose. Whereas our main senses are eyesight and our hearing. And birds, that they have the same senses that they rely on. So they're communicating the same way, and we can appreciate, the incredible sounds, the beautiful colors, and that makes, I think, birds particularly appealing. That and the fact that they can fly. So they embody freedom for us. You can't look at a bird flying and not wish you could do it too. It's such an amazing ability. And I always think to myself, oh, it must change the way they think even, because we must think in a sort of very limited, flat plane, forwards, backwards, left, right. But their thinking is forwards, backward, left, right, up, down, just it's a whole new dimension to the way they think, I would think. I can't get inside a bird's head. So it's just that embodiment of freedom. And then I think the last thing is because they're dinosaurs, they're just cool. Expletive deleted cool, because they're dinosaurs. They're real live, living dinosaurs amongst us. So that's just awesome.
I feel you. I'm a diehard Jurassic Park fan. So I am 100% bird dinosaurs. So cool. Definitely upset factor.
So it's funny, Chris, we actually have quite a few birding enthusiasts on the NOVA staff. And what they've told me is that birders are sometimes either stronger visually at identifying a bird, or they're stronger sort of sonically identifying a bird. So which one of those is sort of your strong suit, and what led you down that specific path?
All right, so visually, I can identify a bird. It's not a matter of identifying so much. They're both are skills of pattern recognition. So you're either recognizing, visual patterns or recognizing, auditory patterns. So, I can identify either way. It's not so much the identification as which sense I lean on for finding the bird. And because I wear these, and without them, and even with them, my eyesight is crap, I rely on these. Definitely an auditory bird, an ear bird. And some of the advantages to that are ears are more omnidirectional. You can only look in one direction at a given time, but ears are kind of working 360. They can often reach further than the eye can. And it can help you sort out what you want to look at. If you're hearing something and you're like, no, 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 oh, that's rare, or oh, I don't know what that is, let me go hunt it down, and then you get something to hit that. So yeah, I definitely rely, I think, sometimes too much on my ears. I'm trying to break myself in that habit and use my eyes to find the birds even more. Because I'll walk by owls, because they're sitting there during the daytime and they're not moving, and I'll miss them. And I want to see them. I don't want to miss them. So ears help with that too, I should say, because a lot of times what you learn to do is you learn to listen for alarm calls. So for example, I'm sitting up on my roof and I hear the starlings going, kick, 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 and my head shoots up because I know they're upset that there's a predator in the neighborhood. And sure enough, one of the local red-tailed hawks or, one of the kestrels is flying around. And this is right here in the middle of Manhattan. Downtown Manhattan, you see a concrete and you're getting cool birds. So.
I think it's incredible that you can hear those birds among everything else that's happening in Manhattan, the subway, people talking, traffic, horns, is that just a testament to your, just your experience in the field, or is it just like almost like I don't want to say a superpower, but you know what I mean? Like,
it's funny that you said it because a friend of mine calls it that. He says it's your superpower. It's not unique to me. Lots of birders have that ability. And the thing is, once you turn into the sounds, you can't turn it off. So, as you said, I'm walking down, it happened with this friend. He and I were walking down the street. There's construction going on the street. There's all the traffic noise. There's us having a conversation. There's people walking by having their conversations. And I'm like, oh, there's a kestrel somewhere. And sure enough, we look at the top of a tower nearby and there's a kestrel at the top of it going, clink, 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 clink. And, I just heard it. It just cut through all the other noises because you're just tuned into those sounds. And it is something that never turns off. It's like a sixth sense almost. So you start reacting to things like alarm calls without even thinking. You hear alarm calls and you start scanning for the predator. So it's cool. It's like a sixth sense. It's like having an extra ability.
That's so cool. And we're gonna test your sixth sense right now. So to a lot of folks, they can hear that tweet, 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 and they'll think it, it's hard for just the random person to know what kind of bird that is. It might just sound like a robin, or it might sound like a blue jay, or we don't really know. So we want to see, I would love to play you a couple of bird sounds. And then if you could tell us what you're hearing and how you're able to distinguish between the species,
Sure.
That would be really cool. All right, so I'm going to play the first song for you.
Okay, so you're starting easy. That was an American robin.
Yes, Sixth Sense is doing great so far.
And the reason why all right, so I'm going to take you through what I'm hearing. Now, most of this isn't conscious. Most of this, when I'm doing it, I just hear it and I know. I'm not thinking about. But I'm going to explain to you now, think through what I'm hearing. First of all, the pattern, triplet phrases. The fact that it's almost flute-like. So, there are different voice qualities in addition to different patterns. There's the pitch. The pitch is rather robust, flute-like, triplet phrases, all of those. And it's also a little harsh. the turns of the notes are a little bit harsh. All of those things tune me into the fact that it's an American robin, plus the fact that, we've all heard it 1,000 billion gazillion times. It's one that's very familiar.
Is whistling a prerequisite to being a good birder? Because I have noticed that so many birders that I do know are very good at whistling as well.
Oh, I can't say. I've never surveyed birders to find out if they can whistle or not. I guess it helps because, I've actually lured in a hooded warbler once when I heard one hiking in the Catskills, and first time I'd ever heard one there, because that's sort of the northern limit of their range.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that can't be a hooded warbler. So I kind of went, and it came flying out of the shrub and right at me in my face like I was a giant hooded warbler in its territory. So I was like, okay, yeah, there's a hooded warbler. So it helps to whistle. You can sometimes make your sightings a little bit easier that way. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to play one more song. And I would love if you could just kind of tell us what the difference of what you're hearing.
Very similar, very similar. And the mechanical reproduction makes it harder to hear the difference because that song is typically softer. It's more mellow. It's very similar to the ramen, but you'll notice every once in a while, it wasn't doing triplet phrases. It was throwing in an extra syllable. So it's kind of going. So it was almost triplet phrases, but an extra syllable. That was a rose-breasted grosbeak.
You got it.
Yeah. So, but it throws in the extra syllable. It's a softer sound, which that mechanical reproduction kind of obliterates. So it's not as easy to tell. But the way it's always described is that a rose-breasted grosbeak singing sounds like a robin who's had voice lessons. So remember those harsh turns I was talking about in the robin song? Yeah, the rose-breasted grosbeak doesn't have that. And then there's a third bird you can get if you learn the robin song, which, like I said, is really common. So it's an easy one to learn if you just sort of start tuning into it. If you hear a robin with a sore throat, then you're hearing a scarlet tanager, and you want to see a scarlet tanager male. And if it's singing, it's a male. So that's a nice thing to see. So remember, if you hear what sounds like a robin with a sore throat, instead of going, it's going, that's a scarlet tanager.
Wow.
And the thing about all this, you're like, wow, that's amazing. It actually isn't. And actually, any of us can do this because we do it all the time. Like if you get a phone call from your mother, she doesn't have to say, "This is your mother." She just says, "Hi, dear," and just the intonation, the word she chooses, the time of day she tends to call. All these subtle, the timbre of her voice, all these subtle things, you're not even thinking about them. It's subconsciously though, all those things cue you into, and you immediately know, oh, it's mom. She doesn't have to say it's mother. It's the same thing with birding. It's just, eventually, if you do it long enough, you start to tune into these subtleties, and you don't even have to think about it. You're like, okay, yeah, it's a black-throated green warbler, or oh, no, it's a hooded warbler, or oh, it's a great crested flycatcher, because it just goes right in there to the deep part of the brain.
Mm-hmm. Wow, no, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. And I will definitely do my part to sort of fine tune my ear to be better at this, because there are definitely I've seen some blue jays and some other things in the backyard that I visually identified.
All right, so I'm going to give you two things here. First of all, blue jays, notoriously difficult because they make a lot of different sounds and they love to imitate hawks. So I have been standing under a tree hearing a red-shouldered hawk going, "Kee-yar, kee-yar," and I'm like, where? And it's right over my head, and I look up and it's a blue jay. So blue jays do that all the time. They're difficult. And the other thing I was going to tell you is the best way to learn the bird songs, in my opinion, is not to listen to recordings, because it'll just become a mishmash in your head. The best way to learn it, and the way I've learned almost all my songs, is out in the field. If I hear something I don't recognize, I track it down. And until I see that bird and its mouth going like this and the throat bobbing and the tail going, because you can be confused. There could be two birds in the same bush. That's how you learn it, because then you associate the sound with an experience and you remember it. Plus, you spend a goddamn half hour trying to find the damn thing, and hearing the song over and over and over that whole time. So.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. So I did want to talk to you, Chris, a little bit about the incident in the Ramble on May 25th. You were birding in the Ramble in Central Park. This white woman, Amy Cooper, called the police, claiming that an African-American man was threatening her life after you asked her to leash her dog. I do want to emphasize that I think one thing that's important for people to understand is sort of the frequency and the similarities of sort of how often racist confrontations in outdoor spaces are experienced by many Black people engaging in, outdoor hobbies, but even just sort of being, outside in spaces. I remember an incident in college where a group of fellow students were, we were all sort of out doing a barbecue as part of like a Black student event. And we got the cops called on us because our white student peers assumed, and this was actually at Harvard, assumed and claimed that we were just kids from Dorchester who just happened to show up in the middle of the quad in the northern part of the campus to throw their event. And so I think it's just over a month having passed since that incident. I'm sort of wondering what reflections you have about that experience and the impact that it's had in the birding community and the sort of the conversations that have spiraled out of it, and sort of what it means for you to think about sort of your role as a Black person who's really sort of, so really engaged by this hobby, something that you've enjoyed all your life, to have to encounter an experience like that while celebrating and while pursuing that hobby.
I'm glad it sparked a lot of conversation. I think maybe just a lot of white people don't realize, because we just take it for granted. And, we've developed a fairly thick skin over it because, as you said, we've all encountered it in some form or another, and encounter it on a fairly regular basis. It is particularly difficult in public spaces, where we're supposed to be able to enjoy the outdoors just as much as anybody else, but as you said, we're liable to get the cops called on us. And I've heard from numerous birders, there are certain places where I won't even go in this country to bird because I am nervous about being there as a Black man alone out there in the field, and I think someone's going to misconstrue something and come at me. I even think about it sometimes in Central Park because I know, as one of the very few Black male birders in the Ramble, that if anybody's going to get shot because they were crouching in a bush with a black metal object in their hands, regardless of the fact that, a white birder could be doing the same thing, trying to see the same rare bird, that white birder isn't going to get shot thinking that they're, creeping, trying to do something nefarious with a gun in their hand. It's going to be me. There are a whole bunch of assumptions that come based solely on skin color. It's a long-standing problem in our country. It runs deep. It goes back centuries. It goes through New York City. The number of people who said to me, "I'm surprised this happened to you in New York City." I'm like, I'm not. This has been going on for ages. So it's a problem that we need to address, and it's going to be difficult. It's not an easy thing to tackle.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. And we actually have a question from someone from YouTube her name is Nancy, and she wants to know, how can I broaden the reach of my birding groups to include more people of color? My partner and I lead local bird walks, but we wish that more people of color would join us on these public walks.
Okay, so it helps if you're trying to lure people in to make sure that the walks are free. So public doesn't necessarily mean free, but hopefully they're free. That helps. Another thing is to make sure that people know they're going on. And one of the ways to do that, for example, if you're trying to reach the African American community, or actually for that matter, the Latinx community as well, go to the churches on Sunday and, maybe start to develop a relationship or approach the pastor and say, hey, we're doing this. And because, I'm not churched, but a lot of Black folk are. So same thing with the Latinx community. So, bring some flyers, ask them if you can put up some flyers in their church that might get people. Also, don't schedule your walks for Sunday morning. Because as I said, a lot of Black folk, a lot of Latinx are churched. They're going to be in church on Sunday morning. They're not going to be on your bird walk. So make your bird walk for Saturday morning instead of Sunday morning. And because everybody's human and everyone likes food, maybe have some food there at your walk, just to lure people in. So those are a couple of ideas on how you can maybe start to reach out.
Great. And I just want to remind everyone that, we are taking some audience questions. So if you have any other questions for Chris, please feel free to put them in the comments and we'll try to get to as many as possible. There's like one or two more that I'd love to ask you. One is, what are the birds that you're always on the lookout for in the hopes of seeing?
Oh gosh. Well, we always love the rare stuff. So any rarity is always a goal. It really depends on the time of year. Spring migration and where in the spring migration we are will change what I'm looking for. But if I had that one go-to bird that I'm always happy to see when spring migration, or for that matter, fall migration is in progress, it's a Blackburnian warbler. I love Blackburnian warblers. They're just spectacular birds with a day glow, fiery orange throat. And they're smaller than sparrows, very active. All the warblers or almost all the warblers are smaller than sparrows and very active. So they're like butterflies with personalities, the way I like to think of them. Because sing and they've got eyes that you can actually look at, not like big compound bug eyes. So they're cool.
Awesome. And someone wants to know, what were your top 5 favorite birds? SNYB from YouTube wants to know, what are your top 5 birds?
That is so hard. That is so hard. I can give you some of the favorites that I've seen in some of my travels. I'm going to stay away from Central Park because then the list gets too long. But I was birding in Africa and I saw the northern carmine bee-eater, which is the color of this bird underneath is carmine, literally like it says. But imagine you're on an island off the coast of Africa and sunset is coming. So there's this, fiery orange globe on the horizon, and suddenly flocks of these northern carmine bee-eaters are flying into the air, catching the setting sun, and that carmine is just incandescent, just glowing in the setting sun. Spectacular. Golden eagles are just so regal. And whenever I see them flying, I don't see them that often. That's another reason why I like to see them. They just float. It looks like they're floating effortlessly. What are some of my other 5 favorites I had to give? The black-tailed train bearer, which is a hummingbird that I saw in Ecuador. And it's got these 2 long black tail plumes on this little tiny bird. But the other cool thing about it is its scientific name, Lesbia victoriae. And I'm like, every woman-loving woman should have that as their war cry, Lesbia victoriae. So I love the black-tailed train bearer. How many is that? 3? There's others. I can't come up with
I'm sure there are plenty of others.
There's a ton.
So to just pivot back to your experience in the ramble for a minute, at the root of this experience was your request to keep a dog leashed. So why, and it seems like this is something that birders can encounter often. So why is it important that you keep your dog leashed at birding locations like the Ramble or in other places around the country?
Right, and the key thing is in protected areas, because I get it. You have a dog, you want to let the dog run around, no argument, except if it's a designated area that says this is a protected area, then the dog's got to be on a leash, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, you got to remember that as much as you love your dog and your dog is lovable, To wildlife, your dog is a wolf. It's a predator, and it's going to disturb the wildlife. In the Ramble in Central Park, it's a key resting spot for migratory songbirds coming up the Atlantic Flyway. They all funnel up the coast and they hit the sea of concrete that's Manhattan, and there's no place for them to go except for that strip of green in the middle of Manhattan, that Central Park, where they know they can find food and water and a place to rest. Crucial for them to be able to rest there so that they can survive the rest of the trip going back to the breeding grounds. And if they're disturbed, if they don't get the chance to rest, they might not make it. Also, I mean, breeding, beaches, it is so important. If there is a roped off area that says, this is where the piping plover is nesting or whatever is nesting, terns, oyster catchers, you've got to keep the dog on the leash in that area, because they will wreak havoc on the young chicks and on the eggs and on the capacity of these animals to breed. And then finally, there's the habitat itself, the ground cover. I mean, if you've ever been to a dog run, nothing grows there. There's a reason. It's that the dogs running around in there tear up the turf, and plants can't grow there. And so if you've got to have habitat for the wildlife to be able to survive. And that's another reason why the dogs have to be on the leash in protected areas. So yeah, I'm pretty militant about that.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, and that makes, complete sense given sort of the importance of keeping these spaces conserved and ensuring that like the biomes are able to, to support all the organisms that live in those spaces. I did want to sort of think about the growing impact of your experience. It's helped inspire the creation of Black Birders Week. Big shout out to Karina Newsom and the rest of the Black AF and STEM group. And basically, which is a week-long series of events that celebrated Black nature enthusiasts and really increased the visibility of Black birders. I'm wondering sort of what have been your responses and your takeaways from that campaign, and sort of where you see it sort of growing and expanding in terms of making the birding community more welcome and more inclusive.
Well, for one thing, it opened my eyes. I used to joke that, you could count the number of certainly Black male birders in North America on one hand, and we all know each other. But actually, maybe that was true. It's not true anymore. There's a lot of us, a lot more of us, and our numbers are growing, and that's fantastic. And I think something like Black Birders Week, went a long way to saying to people, hey, you know what? This is something you can do. Because I don't think there's any more powerful inducement to someone to take something up than to see people like them doing it already. That makes the imaginative leap possible, that this is something I can do too. So I think that was one of the biggest things about Black Birders Week, just in terms of visibility. It said, hey, yeah, we're here and we're out there and we're doing this. And, you don't have to panic when you see us. And more importantly, if you're a young person out there, think about doing this too, if it's something that appeals to you. So I was thrilled that those guys did that. That was fantastic.
And I mean, it looks like it had an impact. We have a comment on someone from Facebook, Connie, who said, thank you for the panels during Birding While Black Week. This really opened my eyes about the difference in birding while Black versus birding while white. I appreciated everyone sharing their thought on the topic. The impact was huge on me. So it sounds like you were really able to reach a wide group of people that maybe wouldn't have before. And that's incredible.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's the goal. So. And I want to say one more thing, which is that it's important not just because it's the right thing to do to get people involved. And, the birds don't belong to anybody. They're for all of us to enjoy. But it's also important because if we want conservation to continue, if we want the birds to survive, we have got to expand the population of birders. It can't just be a bunch of aging white folk. Because guess what? The complexion of the country is changing. In some places, it has already changed, like here in New York City. And if we don't start bringing more people into birding, there will be no constituency to support conservation and to support the birds, to make sure that we can get the necessary legislation and regulations to make sure we protect them and protect the environment. It is crucial that we get everybody birding from all walks of life, or we won't be able to protect the birds.
That's a great point. I never even thought about it from a conservation angle. That's incredible. To kind of get to your point about getting more people involved, I think a lot more folks are staying closer to home now because of COVID-19. And some people are, looking in their backyards or looking out their window, and they're getting their first foray at birding right now because they're staying closer at home. So if people don't have binoculars at home, or maybe they don't have regular access to green spaces, how do you recommend people get started birding?
Well, the great thing about birding is there are birds everywhere. I live, in downtown Manhattan in the sea of concrete, and yet, I routinely see blue jays, cardinals, mockingbirds, red-tailed hawks, kestrels. Every once in a while, I get a peregrine falcon. Once I even had a red-tailed hawk being strafed by a pair of kestrels who suddenly stopped, and that was because suddenly there was one and then another peregrine falcon who took up the strafing of the red-tailed hawk, and the kestrels were like, oh, we're sitting this one out. We're just gonna sit here on the sidelines and watch this. So, and this is in the middle of Manhattan. So there are birds always wherever you go, even if it's just pigeons. Pigeons come in an incredible range of color morphs. And it's actually quite fascinating to see all the different morphs they come in, because that's the result of us. That's the result of humans. We bred these colors into them through captive breeding, and then those populations became feral, and now they've spread through the wild. And yet you would think they would go back to the default color pattern of rock pigeons, and yet they still, all these different color morphs keep popping up in the pigeon population. So even pigeons provide lots of fascinating behavior to watch and color morphs to observe. So, if you've got a backyard, put up a bird feeder, and if you don't have binoculars, put up a bird feeder near your windows, and you'll bring the birds to you. That's one thing to do. One thing I did as a kid during migration, I dug, my parents love me for this. I dug a trench in the backyard right outside my window, my bedroom window, and I hung a hose from a tree branch and let it slowly drip into an upside down garbage pail, so that the garbage pail funneled into the trench, and I made basically a little backyard stream. And during migration, I was there for hours watching what migrants came to the stream. And I saw ovenbirds, and I saw northern water thrushes, and this is a suburban backyard on Long Island in New York. So that's something else you can do. There's tons of things you can do even without binoculars. So I will highly recommend, the second you can save up the pennies, or if you can get someone who's upgrading their binoculars to give you their old pair, get a pair of binoculars. It's eye-opening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I did want to, I know I had a sort of my own sort of selfish question I wanted to ask you related to birds. As a lover of both comic books and birds, I would love to know what your favorite who your favorite bird-inspired superhero is.
Okay, so you warned me you were going to ask me this, and I have to say it is not. It is. I can't say I have a favorite bird-inspired superhero, but if you forced me, it would have to be from Marvel, because I'm a Marvel guy. I don't do DC much. I do DC a little bit, but
and that's okay. That's okay.
I guess I would have to say the Falcon, because he's named after a bird and he can fly, and he's a black superhero. He's a little problematic because he kind of has sidekick syndrome, where it's always like the white dude and his black sidekick, and that gets super annoying after a while. But he is a cool character, and he showed up in the movies, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. So.
Nice. I know we have a few more questions, I think, from Facebook and YouTube. Let's see. So somebody did have a question about sort of citizen science projects related to birds and any opportunities there. Have you engaged in any sort of citizen science projects? I know you mentioned sort of your work around conservation, but are there any opportunities that you've seen there to really engage in doing that?
Well, one of the big citizen science efforts is eBird, which, if I'm not mistaken, is run out of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And, it lets you input your sightings, and through that, they can create a database of all the different sightings in various locations, and especially if you bird an area that we can designate as underbirded. It's not like the Ramble in Central Park, which has dozens of birders combing it all the time. You can be putting in data that they're not going to get otherwise. So that's one citizen science effort that people can engage in.
I did have a follow-up question. You mentioned earlier, you mentioned that you were in Africa watching birds. Where particularly were you? Which country? And
I was in Tanzania and Kenya.
Okay, Tanzania and Kenya. Okay.
Tanzania was, I preferred Tanzania because it was a little less commercial. It was a little more rough and ready. And it has a place called Ngorongoro. It's this crater, basically an old volcanic crater. So it's basically a circle ringed, perfect circle ringed with mountains. And inside that basin are savannas and woodlands and streams. And it's almost like the lost world, all of Africa in microcosm. And it's a fantastic place. I can't rave about Ngorongoro enough. Ngorongoro. Ngorongoro.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have a question, which is something that, I know I've definitely seen. David from Facebook wants to know, often birders will find dead birds around buildings. Can you talk about why that happens and if there's anything we can do to, protect birds in, suburban or urban spaces?
Fantastic question. Especially because the organization I'm part of, New York City Audubon, has done a lot of work around this. First of all, we have a database called dBird, where you actually report where you found these dead birds. And what's happening is during migration periods, the birds are, passing through the city, and the skyscrapers, because they're sheathed in glass, they either don't see the glass or they see the sky or parkland reflected in the glass, and they smash into it head first and break their necks. And, it kills them. It doesn't always kill them, but often, usually it does. And that's why certain buildings in particular, you'll find during migration, the corpses of birds scattered around the base of these buildings.
Right.
What New York City Audubon did was we actually got a law passed that requires new construction of skyscrapers to use bird-safe glass, which to the human eye looks just like glass, other glass, but the birds can see it. And so it means that they're not smashing into it. It saves birds' lives. So that's important. Another thing is lights out at night. A lot of office buildings leave their lights on for, decorative skyline purposes, but the lights can confuse songbirds, many of whom migrate at night. And so it pulls them in, and again, they smash into the windows. So, turning those lights out during migration periods is also a great thing to do. So if you can advocate in your city, and please contact New York City Audubon. We are more than happy to tell you what we did, and you can try to replicate our success in your hometown.
That's so cool. I did not know that there was bird glass. That's fascinating. And when you were going through that process, did you find a lot of pushback, or were people pretty willing to, make that change?
It was a combination. I think because we eventually settled on new construction, that made it an easier pill for some folks to swallow. If we had said, you have to retrofit every building in New York City, no, that wouldn't have flown, so to speak. So, you got to make some compromises along the way, unfortunately, sometimes.
Great. So I guess, again, Gina mentioned earlier that a lot of people are sort of in the process now of really starting to get engaged in bird watching. And so I was wondering if you had sort of like the top 3 list of the resources that people should gravitate towards immediately in order to really get started on their own bird watching journey.
Sure. Get a good field guide. There's any number of great field guides out there. I swear by the Sibley Field Guide, but there's tons of others. And you don't even have to carry the book around these days. You can get an app on your smartphone. So you want that to help you identify the birds and get familiar with the birds. You want a good pair of binoculars. There are some entry-level binoculars that are not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and it's still going to cost you. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. And a third resource is there's tons of resources on the web. Cornell Lab of Ornithology has some fantastic stuff. New York City Audubon has some fantastic stuff. National Audubon has fantastic stuff. So all these web resources are things, and that's a great thing to do, you know, while we're on COVID lockdown, is to tap into some of these web resources. A lot of them will point you towards cams, which are cameras pointed at nests of ospreys or bald eagles or peregrine falcons, and you can watch the breeding cycle, which is amazing. So lots of stuff you can find on the web, and then you want a good field guide, and as soon as you can, get your hands on a pair of binoculars.
Great. Well, yeah, I mean, I know we have to wrap it up in the next minute or so, but I think everyone from NOVA and our community, we just want to thank you so much again, Chris, for taking the time out to chat with us, to share your experience, to share your passion about bird watching. I think it's been, I know, a really exciting experience for me to learn about this as somebody who's just started looking and in the very early stages of just visual identification, just to get started. But I think we all really appreciate you taking the time and hearing from you about this experience, as well as sort of the ways in which we can continue to make the birding hobbyists, the community sort of more inclusive, more welcoming to all people. As you said, it's important, obviously not for the sake of conservation purposes, but also for the sake of really building community and really making sure that people are aware of the nature that exists all around them in their backyards, in their cities, everywhere they go. And so we really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you all again for tuning in to this virtual field trip. Again, if this is your first time checking NOVA out, please feel free to explore our pages, check out our digital content, tune in to the broadcast show on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. And thank you so much again for taking the time to join us for this conversation. We'll see you soon, hopefully.
My pleasure.